Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone listening today. The sun is shining here in Bristol. It's an absolutely glorious day, and we hope the weather is just as lovely wherever you are. So this webinar, brought to you by Training Zone and Rosetta Stone, is all about L&D in the age of the multi-generational, remote, multicultural workforce. Now, this sounds like quite a vast, weighty topic to cover in an hour session, but what we're really honing in on today is how the learning landscape is changing and adapting to businesses that are becoming more globalized, diverse, and technologically adept. And why L&D needs to focus more on soft skills, particularly communication and language skills, to help support business success during this transformation era. So we've got lots to get through today, but before we get stuck in, I'll just do the introductions and I'll walk you through a few of the key features available on the webinar platform. So my name's Becky Norman, and I'm the editor of Training Zone and HR Zone, and I'll be your host for today. Presenting first will be Edmond, CEO of the Learning and Performance Institute, and he'll be providing an overview of the current learning landscape and where L&D is heading. Following Ed will be Sophia Sklavounos, Client Relationship Manager of Rosetta Stone, and she'll be discussing the importance of language communication skills within global businesses. Just a few points on the functionality then. So if you have any questions today, please just click on the purple Q&A icon to submit them, and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation. And just to let you know, we should have about 15 minutes for questions, so yeah, please do ask away. If you'd like to tweet on the webinar, and we encourage you to do so, you can do so directly through the platform by clicking on the Twitter icon. If you think a colleague or friend would find this webinar useful, you can send them the link by clicking on the paper aeroplane icon. And if after the webinar you want to do some further reading on the topic, just click on the green icon with the piece of paper on, and you can download 3 really useful resources from Rosetta Stone. And they're on how to measure language training ROI, how language impacts business, and a 5-step guide to successful language training. Just something else before we start. We'll also have 3 polls for you today during Ed's presentation, so please do keep an eye out for those and make sure you take part. In fact, I believe Ed will be starting on a poll, so I'll hand over to Ed and he can get started.
Great, thank you very much, Becky. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what we hope will be a fascinating webinar for you on the value of communication and the new learning landscape. I'm lucky enough to be working from home this morning in an uncharacteristically sunny Manchester, and as CEO of one of the largest institutes dedicated to workplace learning, I can tell you that effective communication across our international workforce is an imperative. So hopefully, personally, I can share some thoughts with you as well as some strategic ideas. Along with learning, communication is also something I'm extremely passionate about. I've studied 4 languages, and I'm delighted to join Training Zone and Rosetta Stone for the next 45 minutes to an hour. Hopefully, you're going to take away some great nuggets, which will help each of you in your businesses. But let's start with a question. So in September last year, the LPI surveyed 600 chief learning officers, asking them what their #1 challenge was. What do you think was the top answer? So if I can ask you to fill in your answer to that particular question. What was the #1 challenge for heads of learning? I'll give you around 30 seconds to do that. Obviously, many of those can be issues, I think, for heads of learning, but just if you can just pick one, that would be great. 10 more seconds, and then we'll click on and find out what your answers are. Okay. So taking a look at this, we're looking at 20.8% saying financial restrictions, 6.3% alignment with business goals, 8.3% getting people on your learning programs, digital transformation 14.6%, and demonstrating impact 50%. Fascinating answers there. And actually, The majority, well, half of the people obviously there who've responded are saying demonstrating impact, and I'll come back to that later on. But over 90% of the people that were asked in September last year said digital transformation. And as more and more organizations continue their digital transformation journey, we know that L&D has to focus on creating a digital learning agenda that can nurture a more global and inclusive workforce. So let's start by taking a look at where learning is right now. What does the learning landscape look like? Let me be really clear. These are fantastic times for learning and for people to be in learning. The importance of learning to business and the opportunities within learning are unprecedented. Learning is certainly no longer perceived as the poor relation. That's not just my view. Let's take a look at a couple of the organizations and people who will agree with that and who are talking about this around the world. So last year, The Economist issued a report, and within that report, there was an incredible endorsement for learning. They described learning, lifelong learning, as an economic imperative. Now, for those of us that have been in learning and development for as long as I have, I wouldn't say that lifelong learning would have been described as an economic imperative for the last 20 years. How fantastic that it's so intrinsic to the success of business, where we should be really proud of that. Josh Bursin here telling us that it's also imperative that learning is attractive in your company as it allows you to attract the best talent and to keep them. It's now vitally important that you offer modern, personalized, immediate, aligned, digital solutions as learning opportunities. So thanks for your involvement in the last poll. Let me ask you another question. What do you think is the fastest growing recruitment site? Here are your options. And again, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer that. What is the fastest growing recruitment site in your opinion? And just to clarify, we're looking at the fastest growing, not the most popular. So maybe think about that when you're clicking on your answer here. Okay, I'm going to give you 5 more seconds here. Okay, let's take a look. LinkedIn, 58.9%. Indeed, 8.9%. Glassdoor, or if you're not from Manchester, Glassdoor, 26.8%, and Reed, 1.8%. Okay, well, the answer is in fact Glassdoor. Why is it Glassdoor? What is it about Glassdoor that's making it so successful at the moment? Well, people genuinely care these days about the culture of a potential employer. They want to know what it's really like to work there. How are people developed? Glassdoor, as I'm sure many of you will know, is a platform which allows people to review their own companies and companies that they've worked for in the past, giving people who may wish to work in that organization a very honest, in general terms, view of the culture of that company, and arguably as well how you can be developed if you went to work there. So what are the challenges facing companies trying to do this? For me, having spoken at various events around the world and talking to lots of chief learning officers and heads of learning, being where the learning is a real challenge. The working world has never been so digitally competent, and the speed of technological change is unprecedented. So your final question, to keep you involved in this webinar, how many years do you think it took the landline to hit 50 million users? How many years did it take for the landline phone to hit 50 million users? Just a quick answer to that question. Is it 0 to 5 years, 6 to 15 years, or 16 plus years? Just going to give you 10 seconds. Okay, let's find out the answer to that question. Well, let's find out your answers first of all. Don't think many of you clicked on that. So let me give you the answer to the question. You can see this slide here. 50 million users. It took 75 years for the landline to reach 50 million users. It took 13 years for the television to reach 50 million users. But if you take a look at the bottom of this slide, you can see that Angry Birds Space took just 35 days to reach 50 million users. It's an astoundingly short amount of time. And recently, when I was speaking in Madrid, I met the fantastic Laurie Niles Hoffman, who also told me that it took 36 hours for Pokemon Go to reach 50 million users. I think this really gives us a clear example of the rate and the speed of technological change these days. Almost impossible to keep up with it. Now, this is my son, Elliot. He's 12 years old, and it's commonplace in presentations to use anecdotes about young people and technology. But I'm going to go further than that. But let me just tell you a very quick story about Elliot, which I think is really relevant to what we're talking about here. Elliot was doing a project on the Czech Republic recently, and he came home to tell me that that's what he was doing at school. So I asked him what the capital of the Czech Republic was. And he said he knew that, and very quickly got his phone out and was looking for the answer. So I told him, I don't believe you do know that, Elliot, if you're looking this up. That's not the same as knowing it. And his answer at 12 years old was, what's the difference? This, as somebody who's running an international organization in learning and development, blew my mind, really. And he's not the only one who thinks this way. So who else is saying this kind of thing? And let's remember, don't miss the point here. This is not just millennials. This is everybody. So is Elliot in good company when he says this? Let's take a look. Charles Jennings certainly thinks so. Access to knowledge has replaced retained knowledge as power. And for those of you who are a similar age to me, I was one of the first years which was allowed to use the calculator in a maths exam. And I remember my elder brother feeling that that was in some way cheating on my behalf. Nobody would look at a finance director who's using a calculator now and think that they were somehow shortcutting the maths that they needed to do. So yes, Elliot is in good company. And this is a significant shift for learning and development. Do we agree with it? Is being able to access the answers more powerful than remembering? What does that mean for learning? Why don't we take a look now at some of the new roles that the LPI are seeing being created and being recruited for in learning and development, and perhaps give some thought as to how many of these roles are in your L&D teams now. The community manager, responsible for the internal community, somebody who needs to be digitally competent, somebody who can manage the communication of learning, creating engaging teams, disseminating fantastic information across employees and directing content. The performance consultant, somebody who can really communicate with the business, somebody who understands genuine need and who provides a systematic and holistic approach to improving workplace performance through learning. How many of those do you have in your business? The live online learning facilitator. At the LPI, this is the fastest growing professional development program and is now a staple requirement in most modern learning functions. For me, I believe this is probably because it combines digital convenience and human interaction. Maybe it's the new blended learning for many, but certainly being able to access learning in short, sharp pieces, but still being able to speak to somebody anytime, anywhere is a fantastic opportunity. And those who haven't recruited or are using live online learning facilitators in their learning offering, I would really encourage you to look at that. Video producer. How many of us would have thought that this would have been part of the L&D team 5 or 10 years ago? But short, sharp, reusable content available whenever and wherever it's needed is increasingly popular. Somebody who you can bring in or a team that you can bring in to do this, the results are astounding. A digital content curator, somebody who can carefully select great content and direct it to the right people. I would also add in data scientist, actually, into this slide deck, as being able to collect data from the business to create effective learning experiences is now an intrinsic part of learning and development as well. And data-driven learning design should be part of your portfolio of services within an L&D function. But what are the drivers for digital learning if we're seeing such an investment in this side of things? This is a great infographic from an organization I have huge admiration for, Fosway Group. And I just want to pick out 3 particular stats from here. I'm sure this is available now if you just look up Fosway Group infographic digital learning realities research, and you can take a good look at this away from this slide deck. But 71% of those organizations who responded to this research stated that they've started the digital transformation of their L&D function. This isn't something that we think might be happening to us in the future. Most organizations have already started this. Video, mobile, and user-generated content were the top 3 areas of demand for content. I think that's fascinating, and we're really seeing the consumption of this new media, which is why at the LPI we're arguing that bringing in a video production team, somebody who can create content and also share user-generated content through a social community, these things are really valuable now. But interestingly, and I think this is probably the most alarming statistic here, only 18% of the focus on L&D effort was on performance. Why is that? For me, this means that a collective mentality is also needed. Digital alone is not the answer. People need to learn as an organization. But what does this mean for L&D teams? How should they react? Well, they need to adapt to this new landscape with new strategies. Let's look at those new strategies now, and hopefully this will be really valuable for you if you're responsible for an L&D function. First of all, L&D departments and organizations who are investing in learning need to be more strategic. They need to start with business performance as a goal. Understand the real, true business needs. Talk the language of business. Be part of work. The role of learning is, after all, to make work work. Self-directed learning is extremely important, but creating the culture for that to happen is the challenge for L&D. Empowering people to learn away from traditional environments like the classroom is difficult, but it's getting easier. And I think if you can create a learning culture and foster freedom, break down those barriers, the results speak for themselves. It would be naive of any L&D manager, head of L&D, chief learning officer to think that just creating learning, putting it on a platform is the solution. Marketing the service of learning is absolutely essential, and it needs to be persuasive, needs to be communicated well. Using clickbait titles to get people to access learning is not below us. It should be part of what we're doing. Allowing and fostering user-generated content. We've just seen from the Fosway research there that the user-generated content was one of the top 3 areas of demand. So allow that to happen. The sharing of good content developed by colleagues is incredibly powerful. Familiarity of those faces and that environment really helps people to learn. I heard a great example recently of a finance director who was constantly asked about expenses spreadsheets. He videoed himself filling in this particular bit that seemed to be troubling people and sent it out to everybody. And it solved the problem, and it's reusable, and it's from your own finance director. So that should be attractive. Providing flexible learning options that includes virtual classroom, access to videos, social platforms, as we said. But as many people in L&D are saying, it's not about just courses, it's about resources. And think about the content that you really need. What are the most sought after skills and capabilities in your business? Interestingly, I don't know how many of you will have seen this, but the World Economic Forum report that was produced on the 29th of December last year, which you can find if you Google it or contact me via email, I'll send you a copy. The top employers in the world were asked to say what they thought were the top 20 most employable skills. The predictions for that from many were that these would include coding skills, technical, digital competency. All 20 were soft skills. All 20 included creativity, problem solving, communication, working collaboratively. That's fantastic news for people in L&D. The focus needs to be on creating an effective learning and performance culture. And to do that, you need to utilize both people and technology. Digital fluency is key here, not just digital literacy. The ability to utilize technology to galvanize people and improve performance. One of those, obviously, is effective communication skills, which is intrinsic to the success of digital transformation of any L&D function. And central to this is one simple concept. Learning professionals need to raise their profile. They need to demonstrate their worth, and they need to talk the language of business. These are transformational times for anybody in learning. And in order to do that, they must be trusted. And this is the key finding of the LPI's interviews with hundreds of CLOs. And I'll finish with a great tweet that I read from Harold Jarche recently. He argued, don't build around technologies, build around people. Understand people. Hire an anthropologist. Hire a psychologist. Listen, watch, learn. Without people, our organizations are nothing. Communicate with each other. And the importance of effective communication is what we're going to look at right now with the fantastic Sophia Sklavounos from Rosetta Stone. Thank you for your time, and do stay on to hear from Sophia. I've seen these slides, and there's some great pieces of information in here. Over to you, Sophia.
Thank you very much, Ed. That was some really, really interesting and relevant information that you shared with us. And it's kind of conversations that I've had on a daily basis with our clients here at Rosetta Stone. So all of you are aware I'm a client relationship manager here at Rosetta Stone, and I've actually studied over 4 languages in my time, and so I'm happy to help on any questions around language learning, etc. But I'm here to talk to you today about communication, really, and leading on from what Ed was talking about in terms of the relation of communication in our ever-changing L&D workforce, in our workforce and in the L&D function itself. So for those of you who are not aware of Rosetta Stone, I just want to really introduce us properly and why we have the pleasure of talking with Ed today. Rosetta Stone is a digital language learning company. We've helped organizations all over the world, from corporate, educational institutions, governmental bodies, since just around 1992, when we were nothing more than a CD-ROM in a yellow box that you may recognize, to today where we are a cloud-based language learning solution. And we help organizations to deliver language communication strategies for their ever more globalized and interconnected workforces. So day in, day out, our clients actually come to us to understand how can they create more visibility on costs spent on language training, but also the metrics and data behind the outcomes. They want to do this whilst delivering a consistent learning offer on a huge and diverse scale. And one of the main business drivers for them is, not surprisingly, the digital transformation journey. But when we're considering this diverse employee population, how can we ultimately and when we can ultimately deliver global business success, we must ask ourselves, how can we ensure that we are effectively communicating with one another? So it's our belief that it's absolutely critical as part of L&D's priority to ensure a language and communication strategy is in place before anything else. Because without effective communication as the basis of sharing company strategies, conversations between colleagues, the communication of healthy safety measures, whatever it may be, how do we know that we're getting our point across so that the audience has understood and can apply what they've heard or read? Now, what you see on the screen here is actually a number of years ago now, but it's an example of miscommunication or misunderstanding at its best. So when Pepsi's marketing channel wanted to release a new campaign in China, the localized version of Come Alive with Pepsi was actually Pepsi brings your ancestors back to the grave. So that was a really troubled miscommunication there. Now, in fact, Peter Drucker, who you see on the screen, is one of the best known and highly influential thinkers and writers on the subject of corporate management theory. He once stated that 60% of all management problems are the result of poor communication. 60%. So in this instance, what does poor communication actually mean? Let's have a look at 3 examples of what poor or miscommunication could mean in the workplace. Does poor communication mean no communication? Do management simply have a closed-door policy and they're not communicating business visions with their teams? Or does poor communication actually mean that they're using the wrong channels? Are the intranet, email, or social media the right channels to be communicating with all employees? Or thirdly, and most importantly, does poor communication in fact mean that there's a lack of understanding? This is one that's too often overlooked, and language and cultural barriers and a lack of soft skills could be the main factors for your poor or miscommunication in the business. In an increasingly virtually connected world with a more global and diverse workforce, it's highly likely that a number of you, if not most, have probably experienced language challenges on virtual teams. So a Rosetta Stone survey of employees from multinational corporations found that 2/3 of multinational employees said language communication was a problem on virtual teams. If you stop to think about it, it's actually quite ironic that technology is one of the factors creating this problem, but it's also a viable option to be a solution. We at Rosetta Stone here agree with what Ed was saying earlier, actually, that whilst technological advancements at the moment are unprecedented, we also need to invest in our people just as much as our technology. So what's the solution to this? Improving language communication skills across the business. So language training is a key starting point when opening doors to a new culturally diverse world and really starting to understand our customers, our prospects, our clients, and even our fellow colleagues on a deeper level. We've talked a lot about lifelong learning, and language training definitely sits in this bracket, and I know that from experience, having learned a number of languages myself. It takes a huge commitment and many hours to get to the stage where subtle nuances in the language and communication are no longer a barrier. So doing this, we can assume 3 very important things. 1, we can break down cultural and linguistic barriers. 2, we can create stronger relationships with clients and colleagues. And 3, if we can deliver both 1 and 2, we will ultimately have a more successful global business. So what's best practice when looking to implement a language communication strategy? One of the key points Ed made earlier was actually about digital fluency over digital literacy. So here we're utilizing technology to do it well rather than just knowing what to do with it. And this is something that we actually promote here at Rosetta Stone when implementing our digital training solutions. Making language training available in a business is not the same as having a language communication strategy. And while only 30% of companies, which is an alarming statistic, 30% of companies currently invest in foreign language skills, most don't have a strategy behind it. So before we look at these individual factors on the screen, I must stress that the overarching rule around this is that it must be linked to your company's objectives. You need to be strategic. Where are you heading? What's the 3 to 5 year plan? What strategic objectives are you trying to support by developing this language communication strategy? So the first key is to decide on a common language, or maybe 2 common languages if needed. These are vital languages within the organization, and you need to go into specifics like what proficiency level must everyone have in order to ensure real effective communication takes place. We then need to combine this with clear visibility. So you need to know exactly where the skill and communication gaps lie. There must be an established process for diminishing those identified skill and communication gaps. And the solution itself will need to be data-driven with clear metrics on the current situation as well as progression throughout the project. It will also need to be standardized in terms of its quality across the board and scalable across geographies. So also while being able to meet a diverse range of learner needs and objectives. So all these factors combined, coupled with technology, will create the most effective language communication strategy. So just before I finish with the most important factors to consider when choosing your digital language training partner, I want to highlight that although we're here today discussing digital transformation in L&D, and despite this upward trend across the board, many people still think of language training in particular as something which needs to be delivered in a classroom, because you really need that human element in language to become fluent. We 100% agree with this, and the human element is imperative in driving digital learning agendas, and it does not differ with language training itself. It's imperative when choosing a partner that it's not simply a digitized classroom-based content, but technology used to enhance the learning experience, while also providing the opportunity to converse with tutors via that platform, so that human interaction is available. Language learning is a challenge, and using technology, we're able to change and enhance this approach to actually accelerate the ability to learn language effectively. So let's wrap up with 4 areas that you need to focus on when choosing a solution. The first point to consider, as we've mentioned, is visibility. So solutions that are able to offer a company-wide assessment to provide you with the visibility on the communication skill gap in the organization. This is paramount as a starting point to the project and helps you to decide where to focus your efforts. Secondly, learning needs to be personalized, as Ed's also mentioned. In this day and age, we're hearing about this constantly. So each individual has diverse needs, and especially when it comes to language, be it in their proficiency level, in the goals and objectives they have, or what type of language they need to use on a daily basis. So it's critical you can offer a dynamic solution where you're able to meet those diversities, and this will ultimately lead to heightened engagement and success. Thirdly, the content needs to be relevant. When you're looking at a business solution, you may require industry-specific content. This is material that your employees can actually immediately start to use in their day-to-day role and reap the benefits. Lastly, the approach must be flexible. Combining live tutors with a dynamic e-learning platform is paramount, and the importance of human interaction here comes into play. It's fundamental when learning a language to use it, speak it, be challenged, and this is where those nuances and subtleties will be practiced and smoothed out to ensure our employees can become real effective communications in their target language. And of course, our solution Catalyst is made up of these fundamentals, and with the correct combination of innovative language technology and strategic support, we can help eradicate those communication barriers. So to leave you all with a final thought, a very interesting and relevant quote from an Irish playwright that you may know, George Bernard Shaw, that I came across. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. I think that really demonstrates the point I've made today around communication barriers in the workforce, and that you may not even be aware of it, but it could be impacting and heavily costing the business. Thank you for listening, and now along with Ed, we look forward to answering some of your questions, so I will pass over to Becky.
Thanks, Sophia, and thanks, Ed, for both your presentations. Some really great insight there and tips for people to take away with them. Okay, so let's move swiftly on to the Q&A. We've got about 25 minutes, so that's a really decent amount of time to get through lots of questions. So if you do have a question and you haven't submitted it, please do so. We'll try and get through as many as possible. So to start with, Ed, you mentioned on your presentation that the most employable skills are in fact soft skills. Do you think L&D aren't placing enough attention on soft skills? And do you think this is a millennial issue? Do you think that millennials are perhaps equipped with the digital skills but lack the soft skills?
It's a great question, Becky, and I think this is a question around the digital fluency over digital literacy debate. It's easy for people who've used technology throughout their lives to be able to continue using it. It's harder to bring that into your life, perhaps later on in life. It's intuitive. We all see children just picking up iPads and using them. So I don't think it is a generational issue, though, and I don't think it's limited to millennials, this idea of digital fluency over literacy, because fluency means the ability to utilize technology to do something well. I wouldn't say L&D is failing, but I think the balance of investment on digital competencies, the digital skills, against the skills required to make these things work, all the skills that you can see in this World Economic Forum report, collaboration, creativity, problem solving, working within teams, if they are the most employable skills according to the biggest employers in the world, L&D has an obligation to invest in educating people in those areas, in my opinion, and to harness that or complement that with an investment in digital skills development as well.
Okay, great. So soft skills, they go hand in hand with digital skills, but we really need to be focusing on them as well as digital skills.
At least as much, what I would say.
At least as much.
Yeah, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking, and we see this a lot within huge organizations, that the investment needs to go into the digital competency of people. Yes, it does. But if you invest in just digital competency, as I said, digital content alone is not the solution. People and technology equals performance. That's something I'm really passionate about, and that argument is based on data and results from talking to chief learning officers, asking a number of questions. Those organizations that are successful are investing in soft skills of people as well as investing in digital technology. I wonder how many people on this webinar have seen their employer invest in something like a learning management system, but not invest in the skills of people to be able to understand how to use that effectively. That is the very good example of when learning invests in technology and not in people.
Great, thanks very much for that, Ed. And Sophia, your presentation really made it apparent that effective communication skills need to be a priority for business to ensure company strategies are understood, employees are collaborating effectively, and clients and audiences are happy, and so on. So for those who are listening and thinking, yes, this is something we need to be doing, we need a language communication strategy, what are some of the first actions that you think they should take, and how should they approach getting buy-in from senior leaders?
That's another great question there, and partially what I've covered. But to start, I think the main thing is to do your research. You need to build a case and not just go with an idea. Obviously, start with speaking to as many people within the organization as possible about the teams and see if they've noticed any communication issues. And look externally as well and talk to other companies about what kind of challenges they might be having, because there is actually a statistic around this that only, I think it's a third of HR line managers actually talk to HR or L&D about their communication and language issues within teams and start looking at that together. So they need to start with building that kind of case and looking at gathering as much data as possible to support your case. So I did talk about conducting an assessment, for example. So if English is the global language within the business, you need visibility on that initially to actually decide, okay, 70% of the organization actually speak English to the level we need them to, but 30%, which was never realized before, are actually lower than we would expect them to be. So that's where we need to focus our attention. And what roles are those people in? And it's looking at the kind of talent pipeline as well. So looking at that data, being able to then link it to the company objectives. So, think about, are you looking at retention? So are people wanting to have more learning opportunities and kind of feel valued? Is that going to help to your retention numbers? Are you looking at expanding into new markets? So people need more new language skills to expand into those new markets. Or are you looking at reducing the number of workplace accidents on the factory floor? And is language a reason for these, they might be misunderstanding instructions and therefore accidents are actually occurring. So look at the company strategies, get some data to conduct an assessment, and then you can build that case to go with this as a whole case to the senior leadership to promote. And it's really important to get buy-in, as with any project, but from a senior perspective, so that they can have their words heard about it across the business as well, and that when you implement that strategy, not only are all the HR regional business partners motivated to work towards it as well and help you along that journey, but the learners know how important it is to the business, and not just that you're asking them to improve their language skills and they may not feel it's necessary. Does that answer your question?
Great, yes, in a lot of detail. Thank you very much, Sophia. That was really useful. Okay, so we've got a question coming from Jeremy from PepsiCo, and he's asked, can you train soft skills through digital tools? So is only through digital tools, I imagine, or do you need a mixture of learning platforms to use? Ed, if we could go to you first.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to answer that. I think, first of all, thanks for the question, Jeremy, and I'm sure you saw the slide using Pepsi as an example. You can talk to Sophia about that afterwards. I believe that you can train soft skills through digital platforms, and I think maybe the question could be phrased differently. Can you learn soft skills through digital platforms? Might be a more appropriate way of putting it, but as an example, the LPI teaches people how to deliver great virtual classroom training. That's not just about using the platform. That's about the important communication skills required to deliver great live online learning. I think people, as we've said in our presentations here today, people want access to information at the point of need. They want the information to be where they are, and the learning has to be where people are. So soft skills, it might be, as an example, that somebody might want to know how to handle an appraisal that they've got. Should a company still do appraisals, and they're walking down the corridor. Now, if they can get onto the digital repository for their organization and find a great 3-minute video on how to handle appraisals, which has been done and recorded by the person who's going to deliver that appraisal, how fantastic would that be? How does that compare with a 3-day course on how to handle appraisals? I think we're beyond talking about this idea of forgetting curve now, but principles of accessing digital content are all about the convenience. And I believe people can learn soft skills through digital platforms, and increasingly they are doing so very well as well. And the impact, because it is when people need it, the results seem to show a great response, a really strong result. It's a myth to think that these things have to be done entirely face-to-face. What I would say is the perfect complement, and I'm not talking about language training here, because I think there is a strong argument to say that seeing people's body language when you're learning languages, and the intonation is important. But generally speaking, soft skills, ideally, you would want to see some sort of blend, and I'm not talking e-learning and classroom, but a blend of different platforms, different learning experiences. It could be a bit of video, a bit of mentoring, some live online learning, and performance consultancy. I hope that answers your question, Jeremy.
Great, thank you very much, Ed. And I've got another question that's come in from Dee from Diversity Dynamics. I think she's saying that she totally agrees that access to knowledge is more important than retention of knowledge. But then how do we create learners who can recognise when they need to learn or access knowledge? And she's made a comment that investment in self-awareness is probably key. Ed, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think learning organizations, and when I say that, I mean the entire company, not just the L&D function. Organizations have an obligation to develop people beyond their role, provide learning experiences and opportunities beyond what you have employed them to do. People kind of expect that these days. I'm glad that you agree with access to knowledge is arguably more important within business than memory. But I think I didn't want to say by that point that people don't have to remember things. I think being able to implement that knowledge, use that knowledge well, that's the definition of skills. So you can know the answer to a question, but being able to argue around that issue, being able to construct a conversation, hold a debate, present information persuasively to somebody, these are all things that still need to be developed. So yes, we can get the answers to questions at any point. I'm sure I've had Christmas days with my family where you're arguing over who recorded a particular song and somebody will stop the argument dead by Googling it straight away. It's an incredibly valuable source of information, but the ability to communicate with each other and to construct conversations, we're now seeing a real shift, as I said, from the World Economic Forum report within employers, where that needs to be accompanied by creativity, problem solving, complex thinking, collaboration, and effective communication. And I would urge everybody to just, maybe we can share that to all the attendees afterwards, Becky, but a link to that report, because it's fascinating to see that those are the top 20 skills.
Yeah, we can do that. Thanks very much, Ed. And I've got a question come in from Sarah from NetMonkeys. I think this is possibly directed more to you, Sophia. She has said that we are English speaking in our office and based in the Northwest. We do have an employee whose first language is Spanish. We've previously invested in English lessons for him, but unfortunately his manager is still telling me his communication and language skills aren't quite up to scratch and are impacting on the way that the team work with him. Is there anything that you would advise on this situation?
Thank you for that question. So I think it would probably be something we can follow up on a call if you'd like, but I'd ask a few more questions around that. So for example, when you say English lessons, who is providing that? Is it someone within the organization, just a buddy or a mentor, or is it formal classroom training or digital training? If it's digital training, does it have a virtual classroom? Because that human impact, human element is really, really important as we, even in this digitalized world. And how long has this employee been doing these English lessons? If it's only been a few weeks, then obviously language takes a lot of commitment, as I've mentioned. It took me, I did languages at university. I did a 4-year degree in Italian and Spanish, and that's going from scratch to fluency in 4 years. And that was every day, all day. And this employee's probably obviously has a full-time job. So it depends how often the training is, who it is that's delivering the training, what kinds of access to different types of materials they have, what skills are being trained. So I would have a number of follow-up questions to understand a bit more, and then how to advise moving forward. So I hope that's given some food for thought, but I'm happy to have that conversation on a one-to-one basis.
Thanks, Sophia. And Sarah, after the Q&A session, we'll have all our contact details up. So if you want to go through that with Sophia further, then her email address will be available. Okay, next question. Jamie from TCS Claims. He asked, Ed, you mentioned performance training in your presentation. He says, however, I always see this as a grey area between what a leader is responsible for and in terms of motivation, what the L&D section can offer assistance with. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, what I was specifically referring to was performance consultancy. And when we analyze the LPI and a lot of other organizations actually who do similar things, where people are investing their money at the moment, the one soft skills area that companies and individuals seem to want to be investing funds in is in performance consultancy. And we could see from the Fosway report that only 18% of those people that responded to that research were that focused on L&D effort, or only 18% of the focus, on L&D effort was on performance. So it's like there's a lot of goodwill here and the desire to do a great job, but we can't really see the results of it. And in order to do that, We need people who can talk to the business right at the beginning and establish those answers and those requirements so that the L&D service and offering in response to those questions is appropriate. And then obviously from there you start to build a great set of data which allows you to solve problems within the business immediately through multi-format experiences. So yes, it wasn't just performance training, it was more performance consultancy and empowering some of the individuals within learning who probably haven't had any investment on that side of things, the opportunity to improve their business skills and understand how learning aligns with the business performance. Efficacy, if you will.
Thanks, Ed, for providing more detail on that. We've got a really interesting question from Sarah from the conversation space. She asks, as we are connecting more and more through digital technology, are we in danger of losing the art of connecting and having conversations in a human way, i.e. with empathy? And how are organisations supporting people in this way? Do you have any thoughts on that, Ed?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't think we need to get carried away with it. I have two children, a 14-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old son, and it's easy to say that the advent and the unprecedented speed of technological change means that they can't communicate at all. Actually, they're communicating in different ways. I do think, however, that it's still really important to look at, and it's not just me, I've said it 2 or 3 times now, reports are suggesting this. We do need to combine investment in technical skills with soft skills. So if I think it was 800 top employers around the world by one of the most respected organizations have been researched, and they're telling us that what they want people to invest in is things like communication skills. And clearly, we need to be recognizing that. I think there's a lot of good work on the academic side to invest in children's ability to construct arguments and debate things sensibly without just accessing answers. And I think probably within the workplace, we can look to do similar things. Although there are some fantastic organizations who do invest heavily in this, who do want to empower people, and they see humans, they see people as their most important asset. I come back to one of my slides. I will say that people and technology equals performance. It's something I'm absolutely passionate about and committed to, and you'll hear a lot from the LPI in the next 2 years about this. But we can upskill people in how to deliver live online learning, how to develop e-learning, how to host social communities. But the thing that seems to be missing with all of these things is creating a culture of engagement, and that means collective responsibility. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read Peter Senge's book. I think it's called The Fifth Discipline, and he looks at the learning organization and the key things that need to happen within a company to be an effective learning organization. And there's some great examples in that book of companies that have done this really well. So reading that book will answer that question, I think.
Great, thank you very much, Ed. We've got a question from Robert from the European Parliament. He's asking, is there a way to make language learning easier or shorter but efficient than what is currently offered on the market? Is digital learning the final solution for years to come? Sophia, do you have any thoughts on this question?
That's a great question. I think everybody, is always asking questions on how can I speed up my language learning, and essentially, I think it starts initially from, in the European Parliament and the European Commission particularly. I know that people need to have, a couple of languages under their belt when they first join anyway. So if you've learned a language in the past, that might mean that you're bilingual already. That might mean that you're more, you might be able to learn another language more quickly, just because, for example, if I've learned Spanish, I might pick up Italian much quicker. Whereas if you're British and you've never learned a language before and you're trying to learn Chinese, it might take you a little longer. I would say that having access to lots of resources is the best way, and just really trying to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible. It's all about commitment, and it's really down to the person and their motivation. So if it's in an organization, I would say, you really need to look at what the individual motivations for learning a language. Is it because they will reach a promotion? Is it because their manager's telling them to, which isn't really a deep motivation? So, starting with their motivation, that's going to help them to, focus and decide to spend and commit as much time as possible to their language learning. But also having, as I said, resources and materials available to you and immersing yourself as much as possible. So if you do have a digital solution with online virtual classrooms available within it as well, you actually have learning available at your fingertips. And that's obviously one of the old kind of arguments around digital learning anyway. You have access 24/7 wherever you are to log in while you're on the train, log in while you're commuting, and you can actually refresh your knowledge as often as possible. We're talking about the old bite-sized learning, and instead of being able to go to a classroom once a week and forget everything you've learned and then wait for the next week, you can actually become more kind of immersed in the language. So every single day you're refreshing, you're updating your knowledge, you have access to that digital platform, and you can do conversation classes online whenever it suits your schedule. So I would just say as much commitment that you can give to language learning on a daily basis, in as much variety as possible, and thinking about your intrinsic motivators for learning that language is going to speed up the process. And I can't say you can go from a 4-year degree to a 1 year from absolutely nothing to fluency, but it is possible, and I've seen many polyglots actually describing their journeys around really fast ways to learn their languages. But it's basically just about commitment and accessing the knowledge.
Thanks, Sophia. That's really useful advice. I mean, my attempts to learn Spanish, it is a long and difficult process, but really important points there on, keeping motivated and committed to the task at hand. So we've just had Ollie ask, Ed, what was the book that you just mentioned, as he wasn't able to capture it? Could you just tell everyone the name and author of that book again?
Yes, Peter Senge, Senge. I think it's called The Fifth Discipline.
Great, thank you very much, Ollie. I hope you were able to capture that this time. And we've got a question from Catherine Chapman. She's asking, what do you think is the best way to help or guide people to learn digitally, given that everyone will have different skill sets? Ed, could you provide some insight on that?
Well, it's about understanding where they're learning at the moment. So probably the most successful learning organization at the moment in the world is YouTube. I think most people will access YouTube for answers to their questions, to learn how to be able to do things. Any search engine will obviously provide answers to questions, but I think the most searched things on YouTube are how to do particular things. So it can vary within organizations. So the important thing here is to talk to your employees, talk to your colleagues. Let's try not to refer to them as students and delegates. L&D is the only function that seems to refer to their colleagues and employees as anything other than students. Talk to them and find out where they access information, and then provide learning experiences where they are existing. So if everybody's using YouTube, create short video content and get people to use you. And the difference here as to why they would use you and not YouTube is the final slide that I used, and that's trust. If they trust your content more, they will use your content, and it's more appropriate to them. So the example I used earlier about a finance director creating a short, and it's a real example, creating a short video on how to do something in particular on the expenses spreadsheet that everybody was using, and everybody was asking him how to do it. That is better than watching a general video on YouTube about how to do certain things in Excel, because you're familiar with that person and it's specific to your requirements. So if you haven't seen it already, and I don't know whether there's a recording, but if you get the chance, I would urge you to see any webinars delivered by Laurie Niles Hoffman, who talks about data-driven learning design. And I think that would really help the person who's asked this question, because she talks about how you can source the data, and this is the data science side of things, from companies to be able to provide the right solution for people. And that means organizationally and individually. We've all destroyed learning styles, but I do think that there are people who might prefer to access YouTube videos more than they might prefer to go on a live online learning session. That there will be people who have a particular favorite when it comes to the medium. And that's not learning styles for me. That myth has been debunked over and over again. So find out what your organization as a whole seems to find the most attractive way to learn. Find out what individuals are doing when it comes to learning, and create learning experiences where they are operating. Embed the learning experience within the workplace.
Great. Thank you very much, Ed. Unfortunately, that's all the questions that we've got time for now. But if your question wasn't answered, and I'm aware that there were a few that weren't answered, fear not, you can connect with us. Our details are up on screen, so if you have a specific question for Ed or Sophia or myself, then please do email us. Don't forget, you'll get a copy of the recording sent to you so you can re-engage in your own time. And I think that's just about everything. So thanks very much to Ed, to Sophia, and to everyone for attending. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.